Hi, my name is Brandon, and I'm an alcoholic and addict in recovery. When I was in my addiction, one of the things that I wanted the most is to be able to moderate my alcohol consumption. I dreamed of being able to come home from a day's work and have a beer, maybe two, maybe not even finish the second one, and then be happy with that and not feel like I was having to restrain myself. When I was having these dreams, it was times when I was trying to moderate, when I was trying to keep my beer consumption away from the 12 to 18 pack a night and down into the just 6 pack a night. And I would think about things like, okay, if I just have one beer before dinner and one beer after dinner and one beer during dinner, then I can keep it to 3 beers. But I was never able to make that happen. And I now know that that's because of the way that my brain works. It's the way that the drug works. It's the way that all these things work together to make me the type of person that cannot moderate. So when I was reading This Naked Mind by Annie Grace, you see on the cover it says control alcohol, and that's a red flag for me. And so I was very interested to see what she really said about, well, can you control alcohol? And I was very happy to read today that she talks about the same principles behind addiction that I was taught, which is namely people who have the makeup for addiction cannot be taught to moderate. And there are specific reasons why. So I'm going to read some about that today from her book. And start with a little overview of what alcohol and other addictive drugs do to the brain. She says, to review, addictive drugs from nicotine to heroin release artificially high levels of dopamine in the brain. While scientists used to believe that dopamine was linked to feeling good, they now believe dopamine is linked to learning. And learning includes wanting, expecting, and craving. Rather than giving us pleasure, dopamine teaches us how to get pleasure. It helps us learn the most effective ways to stimulate the brain's pleasure center. We know that alcohol artificially stimulates the brain's pleasure centers. We also know that to maintain homeostasis and protect itself, the brain turns down the pleasure received from alcohol over time. This is tolerance. This is why at the end of my drinking career, I was desperate to drink, yet I received little to no actual pleasure even after 2 or more bottles of wine. The explanation is clear. My brain was repeatedly artificially overstimulated by alcohol, so it built a tolerance and produced a counter chemical, dynorphin, which turned down the stimulation. Over time, it took more and more alcohol to feel any stimulation, and everyday pleasures wouldn't even register because of the high levels of dynorphin my brain was producing. So she goes on to expand on that by referencing two folks who developed a theory about drug craving. So I want to read about this some too, because the craving part is the part that is really important. We can diminish or even eliminate cravings through working the right kind of program of recovery. But once the drug gets introduced into the system again, the cravings are very likely to pick right back up. So she writes, Terry Robinson and Kent Berridge formulated a theory for the neural basis of drug craving called the incentive sensitization theory of addiction. The theory states that repeated use of addictive drugs makes the brain's dopamine center hypersensitive to that specific drug. This will happen differently in different people. Some people have higher natural levels of dopamine and some naturally lower levels. However, as I understand it, it is possible for this hypersensitivity to a specific drug, in this case alcohol, to happen in anyone over time with repeated use. According to Robinson and Berridge, the repeated use of addictive drugs produces incremental neuroadaptations in this neural system, rendering it increasingly and perhaps permanently hypersensitive to the drug. This hypersensitive dopamine system creates a craving for the drug that can occur separately from liking the drug. And this can produce addictive behavior, compulsive drug seeking, drug taking, even if the expectations of the drug's pleasure is diminished, and even in the face of strong disincentives, including the loss of reputation, job, home, and family. Did you catch that? This means if you drink enough alcohol over time, you can change the response of your brain to alcohol. And once that change has occurred, it may never return to normal. This explains why someone can be sober for 30 years, drink a single beer, and be thrown back to drinking past the point of throwing up until they are unconscious. This means that one drink, even after prolonged abstinence, can stimulate craving for alcohol so that you will continue to drink it no matter what the consequences are, and worse, that you won't even enjoy it. So, very, very important stuff. And it all goes to show that what happens in the brain of people who have substance use disorder is that we see a lot of chemical and structural changes as a response to repeated intake of the drug. And this leads, these changes can be permanent. And what that means is that reintroducing the drug after periods of abstinence is likely to lead back to cravings. And that's why it's so important for people who are in recovery to work a consistent program of recovery, because the phenomenon of craving is something that is always possible to come back on in the brain and can be very hard to turn off, because the neural pathways that created that phenomenon are forever implanted in our brain. They are forever there. So one of the reasons that I wanted to read this is that I feel like a lot of people want to return to moderate drinking. They may have started as moderate drinkers, and I understand where those people are coming from. And unfortunately, there are others out there who are trying to profit off of those people. You will see ads on Facebook, on social media feeds, on the internet, of people who are selling programs to teach you how to moderate. I had a friend who wanted to take one of these programs that was well over $1,000 that promised to teach how to moderate alcohol use. And my initial reaction was, why would you want to do that? Why would you want to learn to moderate alcohol use unless you are an addict? People who aren't addicted to alcohol don't care about moderating their use, So if you know you're addicted, why would you want to continue using the drug, even in small amounts? And the last thing I want to read from her book, she says, I would like to note here that if you have altered your brain to this extent, there is hope. Once you have broken the cycle, your cravings will go away. You will never be back in the misery of addiction if you never drink that one drink. Even though the dopamine hypersensitivity to alcohol will exist, it will remain dormant as long as you introduce no alcohol into your body. And that's the key. And that's unfortunately what gets people sometimes, is that as you get further and further from your actual addictive, the actual time in addiction. So as you get further and further from that last drink, those cravings do go away. I know, as someone who's been alcohol free for almost 5 years now, I don't get cravings for it, maybe once a year, twice a year. It's very, very rare. And those cravings are fleeting, like they'll last a couple minutes. So cravings are not a big part of my experience these days. But I know for a fact that if I were to go back to using, if I took a drink, that craving would happen like that. I can, even if I entertain that idea of having a drink, I can feel my brain already thinking about the second one. I can feel it right now, just talking about it. I can feel my brain going, well, one wouldn't be enough. And I'm very fortunate that I can still hear that part of my brain. And that is why I continue to work with other people who have addiction and who have alcoholism. That's why I continue to go to meetings about it. That's why I continue to do videos like this every single day, because I've got to stay in touch with that part of my brain that says, you can have another beer. Because that's the part that I have to be scared of. The part that says you can have one beer and is fine with that, that part doesn't exist for me, and it never will. No matter how much I pay to a program, to a person to teach me how to do it. And those people are some of the worst people on the internet. I mean, there are terrible people on the internet, but these people are terrible as well, because they are preying on people who are in a very, very vulnerable position. So that's the bottom line, is that, if you have developed this phenomenon for craving, if you are in a position where you cannot control your intake of alcohol, and trying to quit has been unsuccessful, do not pay anybody to teach you how to moderate, because they are just trying to they do not care about you. They do not care about your well-being. They are solely there to take your money. That's one of the reasons that AA never seemed suspicious to me, because they've never asked me for money, except for if I'm able to contribute $1 at the meetings that I go to. Otherwise, AA has never asked me for money, and I'm always suspicious of programs that ask me for money, because you kind of wonder, what are they going to sell me? And so you got to be very careful with that. And people selling moderation, they're selling lies, and they're preying on addicts and alcoholics and vulnerable people who should be spending that money elsewhere. That's all I got for today. Have a good one. I'll be back tomorrow with more.